In America, gone are the Fiesta and Focus ST. What we get to replace it? The Edge ST, an SUV that Ford claims is a sports car. Let's take a look. Now, whether you're a Ford fanatic or not, I've had my dirty little hands on most of them. The Ford Escape, the Mustang, the Edge, they all look good. Their exterior styling isn't off the deep end. They maintain good proportions without going, too bulbous or too skinny. And in the case of the Edge, most all of the body panels are painted. They're body colored. There's no huge black plastic chunks all over the place. And when you look at the headlights, the taillights, it's just very cohesive. And I think that's one of the strongest parts of the Ford Edge, despite its age. But you can only look at the outside for so long before you start to notice the ST treatments on the interior. And the best part of this interior space is the ST seats. Part of it is because you have this micro suede or Alcantara center portion. So it's cool, and its absorption level for people that have, well, let's say dairy sensitivities is excellent. I have never had a point driving this car where I felt like the seats weren't almost perfectly set up for street driving. I was in here for hours on end. The bolsters are good. The adjustability is good. So this is one of the reasons, again, why you would buy an ST. The next part is some of the little attention to detail in here is pretty good really mostly good. And I just got out of the Edge Titanium, and most of what was good about that carries over in here. They're very similar. Now let's get into the parts that are a little bit more difficult for me to swallow. Now I'm going to roll up this window because it's a little bit windy. I had my buddy Ronaldo. We were on our way to hieroglyphics class, and he said, well, it's not a bad interior space. Tell me how much it is. And when I told him this thing was $50,000, he nearly spit up his soy latte all over these ST seats. And I gotta agree with him. That is a steep asking price, namely when you look at the competition. My big issue is the interior space, and I say this about every single Ford vehicle I'm in. They need to take a look at their interior design team and material choices, and just look at the competition, what they're doing, from Mazda to Toyota to Hyundai and Kia. Even Chrysler is doing a better job than them, and there's no way that you could justify the price point unless they were doing something magical with the rest of the car, which we'll go into in a bit. But here's what's bad. I had the Edge Titanium, and I noticed that the driver's side vent was loose, the plastic, and I was going to give it a pass until I got into the ST, and it has the same problem. The rubber or dash material does not meet the vent, and the whole vent is loose. Most of the other fitment of the panel pieces are not that great, and then the entire center stack. When you take a look at this, this is the epitome of generic. It looks like it literally cost them 50 cents to make this. And, everything's easy to use, at least there's physical controls, but then they leave out stuff like the steering wheel heater button. Where is it? It took me literally like 3 minutes to find it, and it's basically in 2 spots in the touchscreen. Why would they leave it out of the physical controls? And my guess is cost, laziness, whatever. And then you have the gauge cluster, which is, it just looks dated. And it looks like it was kind of integrated back in the days of the Microsoft Ford Sync, their old infotainment, because they still have some of the color palette and the way that it looks. And even their infotainment screen, there's a settings menu where everything looks clean, and then they have the Ford app icon, the Ford Pass Connect icon, which is blue, and everything else is gray. And it's like little details like this, you can tell the attention to detail is just not in this interior space. Now, I don't want to end on a sour note, because there are some good things about this vehicle, and I can understand why some people would buy the lower trim levels. The doors, for example, they have a really great opening, really wide opening, front and rear. Makes it easy to get inside and out. The next part is the storage capacity. When you open up the rear hatch or the lift gate, It does. You immediately notice how tall and how wide the load area is. And you can put down the seats manually and the rear seats recline a little bit, or there's an electronic release that kind of push the seats forward. Now, when you open it up, it's its highlight. Again, cargo capacity, comfort, and adjustability. The steering wheel is electronically telescopic. Both seats can electronically adjust, and the overall comfort and just calmness that you get on this interior space. But everything aside from that, from attention to detail, most of the materials, the accents, the sound system, the infotainment is slow. It's just pretty much below average in every other regard. It's indicative of the age of this platform and design. But let's take a look at this in the shop and see the underpinnings. Now's your chance to have a look at the Ford Edge ST on the Benpack lift. And due to some creative marketing, Ford has made something old new again. And when I say old, this is based on the CD4 platformer architecture, which was being designed pre-2014 and is shared with cars like the Ford Mondeo and the Ford Fusion, which were pretty solid. Now, because it's older, you can't really nitpick this. So when I say make new old again, what have they done? Well, they rebranded the Edge Sport to the ST, made it look a little bit different because people know what the ST is in the enthusiast community, and it might trick some people. A lot of this really is carryover from the Sport. The calipers and the rotor size are the same. It has a solid uprated front sway bar and a hollow uprated rear sway bar on the ST compared to the regular models. And then the ST model gives you the optional performance brake package for around $2,200. And what that gets you is the same rotor and caliper, but they paint the caliper red. And it gives you more aggressive brake pads with a higher temperature threshold and some vent work for them, and larger 21-inch wheels and tires, which this doesn't have. So basically, this is kind of the carryover from the old Sport. Now you have aluminum lower control arms here, an aluminum knuckle, a lot of the same aero panels and underbody that you would get with the previous Edges or the Edge Sport. The biggest change here is you get the new twin-turbo V6 that makes more horsepower, but you need to use premium fuel to get more horsepower, and it gets the new 8-speed automatic. And the 8-speed really isn't all that new, because what they did creatively, probably to save cost, is they took all the gear sets out of the old 6-speed automatic and put the same gears in it. And then they just created one new gear, or two new gears. Second gear is new, and 8th gear is new, which explains some of the strangeness in how it shifts gears, because second and third are so close, and then third and fourth are so far apart that you notice it when you drive, and I'm going to talk about that more. But let's get to the rear end and talk about the all-wheel drive system and more. Now, as you nose around here, the first thing you're going to see is these massive lower aluminum control arms that are connected to an aluminum knuckle. Ford is good about doing that. Everything else is kind of stamped steel. Your lower control arms, your subframe, it's just typical stuff. I think one of the things here that I feel like they could have done is done something with this. I mean, they have these kind of triangular exhaust tips, but they're just this kind of cheesy muffler. It could use more exhaust throat out of this car. Now, the big thing to talk about is the all-wheel drive system. I will say this, I think this is a lost opportunity if they're going to make this an ST model. They have the ability, and they've manufactured some torque vectoring differentials. I think if you really wanted to get nuts with this, that's what they should have included here. But what they've included instead is your traditional on-demand all-wheel drive system that is capable of decoupling itself. So it can go in true front-wheel drive mode and then reactivate based on software to engage the electromagnetic clutch and transfer power here. Now, the only thing that Ford is claiming is that they're using an AI all-wheel drive system, the new catchphrase in tech and companies talking about AI, everything's AI, artificial intelligence. All it is, it's an algorithm. They're using all the body control modules, the sensors, the wheel speed sensors, yaw rate, acceleration, temperature, windshield wipers, pretty much something that every modern company is now using. And the software is able to predict when it needs to kick the all-wheel drive system into action, transfer the power to the back, even when you're just cruising on the road, just little steering wheel angles. When you accelerate, it may not choose to send power to the back at all, or sometimes it may, and it's all software driven. You don't really have control over when it does it, but Ford says they've spent a lot of time in tuning it, and when you drive it, sometimes you notice that. But let's get this thing on the road. You know, we can talk about the tech stuff all day. Let's see how it drives. We are finally behind the wheel of the Edge ST, and this vehicle is supposed to wow me with its athleticism, and I've driven this plenty of miles now to have a good feeling on what its capabilities are. So let's start with the ride quality, and this is a highlight of the Edge. And typically in ST products or some of the Ford performance vehicles, ride quality is not something that you rave about. With a combination of the seats and the way they have this suspension adjusted, you can drive this every day over every pavement type and have zero issues with it. It's dampened as good as pretty much all of the competitors, even the better competitors. It's one of my favorite parts of it. The side effect is it's not the most quiet interior space, but you know, given its age, they didn't put a high emphasis on reducing NVH from wind noise and all that. But it's not totally ridiculous, and I think you're going to notice that right away, is my point. Now, speaking of which, ride quality is one thing, but does it sacrifice handling? And one thing it really doesn't do is it doesn't sacrifice the handling much. For an SUV of this size, it is pretty impressive how well it is nimble, but you know, you do have 20-inch wheels and tires here, so you get the immediacy from the tire design. There's not a lot of rollover, but the first thing I noticed was this feels very much like a front-wheel drive vehicle. It tends to understeer way too much. The all-wheel drive system doesn't kick back into the rear enough to kind of help you rotate through turns. And sometimes I'll get in a tight scenario and it just feels like a total front-wheel drive fest. And I think that's one of the biggest disappointments, because Ford talks about how they have artificial intelligence behind the all-wheel drive system, but then when you start to drive this thing like a maniac, it really doesn't do that. But let's, you know, pound this thing around a little bit more. Now, it does have bigger brakes than the regular Edge, and you notice it, but it's not gonna blow you away. It gives you enough confidence, but let's be real, nobody's gonna drive this thing like a maniac, even though they're trying to market it as a sports car. I find that it drives pretty much like every other SUV in this class, and you know, it's just got a much better motor. Let's talk about that. I'm gonna come to a stop here, put this in sport mode with the dial shifter, and I'm just gonna take off from a stop and see how it accelerates. So one of the first things you're gonna notice when you start to drive this thing hard is the fake engine noise. It sounds like a synthesizer, and Ford does this on their twin turbo V6s on many models. I don't know why, it sounds horrible, and it comes on in sport mode and non-sport mode when you get past a certain throttle position. You can't disable it, but much like the straight pipes do, you can kind of hit the S when you're accelerating, and you can hear it turning on and off. It It's so stupid. It's so cheesy. I hate that manufacturers do this and then don't give the customer the ability to disable it. But the biggest thing about the ST is the transmission. And I talked about this in the shop, and I think the only way I can show you the ultimate laziness in design is to give you a quick demo of what it's like to switch between second and third gear back and forth, at how close those ratios are, and then what happens when you go from third to fourth. So let's take a look at that. So basically, what they did is they took the second gear, third gear, fourth, and so on from the 6-speed and just put it in here. They added a new second gear, so essentially you have 2 second gears in the Ford ST. So when you're driving, even normal, you'll feel this rubber banding effect from it switching from second to third. It feels almost like a CVT because the ratios are so similar. It's like, okay, I'm just gonna switch from second to second. And it's really annoying, and you'll notice a lot of times that the electronic programming of the transmission will just skip second gear altogether and go from first to third, or start in second and switch to fourth. And the other annoying part is from third to fourth, it's such a steep change. And it's one of the worst parts about this vehicle is the transmission performance. Even the manual control is not the quickest to respond. Despite it rev matching, it's not particularly smooth to upshift all the time, and it's certainly not the smoothest to downshift. And you know, for a vehicle like this, if you're gonna try to sell a sporty image, you better have the transmission performance sorted out, and they just don't. Now, the last thing to talk about is I spent a week with the Edge Titanium, which is very similar to price. And you know, it doesn't have the higher performance motor, but to me, these vehicles feel so similar in terms of performance on every angle that I feel like what you're buying here is a lot of the branding more so than anything. It is a good riding vehicle. It does feel confidence inspiring. The electronics work pretty well, but this is, for the price tag, it's a very difficult pill to swallow. But let's get into the final thoughts, and I'll talk about some of the other nuances. Final thoughts on the Ford Edge ST. Now, when I heard Ford Performance was involved in doing this project, I thought, well, maybe it's going to be something like the Jeep Trackhawk, or a more nimble version. And then I started seeing commercials where guys like Ben Collins and Ken Block were shilling for this. Even Donut Media got a payday to do a commercial. And this is where it hit me. I'm like, oh man, here we go. And now after driving it, I can tell you one thing for sure. This is a marketing exercise. They took the ST badge and they slapped it on an SUV to see if it would sell. And it's not that Ford Performance can't do things. And in fact, they've been able to turn things that are mundane into amazing products, like the Focus ST and the Fiesta ST in America. They have a rabid following with enthusiasts for a couple reasons. One, they were affordable. The Edge ST is not. Two, they were more hardcore. They rode firm, they handled well, they were edgy, almost rear-wheel drive feeling when you started to push them hard. They were a lot of fun to drive. The Edge ST is not a lot of fun to drive. They've taken a higher horsepower motor, which requires 93 octane or premium fuel to get that horsepower level. They took a mundane transmission and kind of reutilized other parts. And it's just a big vehicle. It's not fun to drive. I'm sorry. In fact, I just got out of the Edge Titanium a couple weeks ago, which was a really solid vehicle. And I can't tell much of a difference between the two. Namely, for 95% of people that are going to be buying this, there's not that much difference. And I think, you know, if you're going to take a sub-brand, know who you're marketing it to. Don't insult the enthusiasts by pretending, and that's what they're doing. And that's just the straight answer to this. Nobody is going to get behind an Edge ST and be like, oh my God, I'm going to trade in my sports car for this. In fact, there's so many other vehicles in that $45,000 to $50,000 price range in terms of SUVs. This really does nothing particularly special in any regard. Yes, it is comfortable. It rides really well, and it has a ton of cargo capacity. But that can be said for so many vehicles. In fact, the negatives about the Edge ST far outweigh the positives. And in that regard, You know, maybe getting a lower trim level that's more affordable, I can see it. But as it stands, I can't recommend this. Now, if you absolutely have to have the Edge ST or any Ford product, head over to Ames Ford in Lincoln. They're one of the few dealerships I've ever seen that offers a lifetime drivetrain warranty on any new vehicle you buy from them. It's built into the cost, and it's underwritten by CNA Insurance, so you could go anywhere in the US and always have it covered. And that's one of the nice things if you're looking for a Ford or a Lincoln product, that, again, if you have to have it, well, that's a good place to look, even if you're out of state. So I hope this video was worth your time. Take care, and I'll talk to you later.
I'm on my laptop right now. This is the gentleman you're leaving me for? Very well. I hate the savage geese. I'm going to show you how to get rid of them. Just like this.